So how do you determine the correct exposure and contrast to make a fine print? By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to figure that out step by step. And we're going to start by analyzing a proof print. Think of this as your first draft, and you're gonna get all that information from the negative out onto your paper. Your proof print does not have to be perfect, but what really matters is that it tells you what to do next. So a proof print is your first straight print made so you can really evaluate your image. We're not doing any dodging or burning, no manipulation yet. So you just want to see what the negative is giving you with your printing materials. First, it's incredibly valuable to have just some standards set up for these different proofing sizes. This just makes everything easier by removing a lot of variables. So you want to set your standard enlarger height, a standard lens, a standard aperture, a standard paper developer, and then a standard film and developer combo. And you're gonna wanna do this for 5x7 and 8x10, and really any other just sizes that you print often. This is gonna save you time and eliminate guesswork, because if you keep changing things, you're gonna have to start over every time. And that's why it's really helpful to start out with just one film and one paper, because it simplifies everything. So like I mentioned, contact sheets can give you a good idea about exposure and contrast, and test strips from the last video can really help you dial in your exposure, but your first proof print is where you can really start getting things dialed in and planned out. So first, make your first print using a full sheet of paper, and you're gonna wanna use a middle contrast filter like a number 2, and don't use any dodging, no burning, just a straight print. Then process that print normally. And here's an incredibly important tip. You wanna use a very dim viewing light to turn on first. This lets your eyes adjust, because when you first turn on the main lights after you've been in the dark for a while, your eyes are gonna be super dilated and you'll think the print is just much brighter than it is. And this is a huge part of dry down issues that people have. A lot of the time it's not really dry down, it's just your eyes playing tricks on you. Another thing you wanna do is make sure you squeegee the print when initially viewing it under that dim light. And lastly, fully dry the print before you critically evaluate it under normal light. So what this looks like for me, after my print has been in the fixer for 30 seconds, I turn on my dim viewing light. I finish the fixing, give it a good rinse, and squeegee it off on my viewing board. And this is all done under a dim 11-watt bulb. I evaluate the print for a minute until my eyes feel adjusted, and then I turn the room lights on. After that, I'll dry it with a hairdryer and evaluate the print in normal lighting. And if you wanna see a more in-depth workflow that I use all the time, check out the free masterclass that I have linked in the description below. Now, the whole reason I go through that whole process is because if you don't look at the print properly, you're gonna make the wrong decision next. So once I've got the print in front of me and I know what I'm seeing correctly, then I can move on to make informed decisions on what the next steps are. And this is one of the most important concepts in darkroom printing. Exposure controls highlights and contrast controls your shadows. So first, determine if your highlights are where you want them. If they're too bright or too dull, we want to fix that before we do anything else. So if your highlights are wrong, change your exposure and make another proof print. And as a general rule of thumb, for dull highlights, reduce exposure by 10 to 20%. For highlights that are too bright, increase exposure by 10 to 20%. And it's really important that when you're starting out, to just make one change at a time. Then make another print, process it, and evaluate it. And I know it's gonna be really tempting, but don't start changing your contrast if your main problem is still your highlights. Then once you have your highlights looking how you want them, it's time to start looking at your shadows and dial in your contrast. Are the shadows blocked up and not revealing detail where you actually want it? Or are they just completely washed out and look muddy and weak? And remember, contrast controls the shadows. So if your shadows are too dark, you want to reduce the contrast. If your shadows are too weak, you want to increase the contrast. Here's a simple way of looking at this whole thing. If your highlights are wrong, fix exposure first. If the highlights are right but the shadows are wrong, fix contrast. If you make a huge contrast change, make a new test strip and recheck your exposure. If the change is small and you're already close, you can usually estimate and refine it, but be careful, just make one meaningful adjustment at a time. And this is simply because if you change everything at once, you're gonna end up confused and you're not gonna learn what's going on in the print when you made that adjustment. And when adjusting exposure and contrast, I like to look at the global or overall contrast first. the brightest white and the darkest dark that I want for that print. Then I immediately turn my attention to the most important subject area in the print. This is the area that I dial in my overall exposure and contrast for. And this usually works the best because secondary areas in the print can be adjusted through local controls later. But I want the focal point and main subject to be prioritized and dialed in perfectly first. I don't want a less important area of the image controlling my major or main printing decisions at the beginning. For instance, in this print, I'm basing my exposure and contrast off the main leaves resting in the base of the tree, the highlights there. I'm not concerned about this upper right area, which is very bright and could also be considered a highlight. So when I make the proof, if this upper right corner, it looks blown out and distracting, I'm okay with that for now. And that's because I'm going to take care of that with local controls later. So you have to kind of look past certain things at certain times. And getting to the right exposure and contrast levels for that print, you may need to go through 2 or 3 sheets of paper, maybe even more, getting it to the final proof, like dialed in where the exposure and contrast looks perfect or just right. But the main point here is that this is not trial and error. This is a controlled sequence of steps you're going through to fine tune that exposure and contrast. And when you do hit that magic setting, make sure you record everything. Write all this stuff down, your enlarger height, your lens, your f-stop, exposure, filter used, paper developer, developer time, developer temp, and any other adjustments and thoughts on what you think needs to happen next in this print. That really matters because now you're building a repeatable printing workflow. So from here, your job is to dial in the correct global or overall exposure and contrast for your print, get the highlights where you want them first, then shape the shadows and low values with contrast. Once that's in place, you're ready to move on to local adjustments. We're gonna start working with dodging and burning, and we're gonna learn how to use those local adjustments to really shape the print and bring out what you want the image to say. And if you want a deeper step-by-step walkthrough of the full printing process, check out the free Darkroom Masterclass linked below. That's the best next step if you wanna see how this whole workflow fits together. I've also been using this Darkroom Assistant app that I've been developing for like the last 6 months. And that helps me log proofs, track settings, and carry all those decisions forward. There's just so much less guesswork when using this and so much less wasted paper. And I'm gonna be sharing more on that real soon. But for now, just remember the proof print is your starting point. It tells you what the negative needs with your materials. Dial in the highlights first, then shape the shadows with contrast so we can move on to local control. We'll see you in the next video.